This episode is supported in part by Sacred Wright's public scholarship on religion, gender, and sexuality through a grant from the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation. You can find Sacred Wrights online at sacred-rights.org and the Carpenter Foundation at carpenterfoundation.us. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Welcome to Season 9 of Conversations featuring cohort members from Sacred Wrights. Since 2020, I have loved discussing the diverse array of research conducted and produced by Sacred Wrights scholars. Playlists to the previous 8 seasons are included in the link tree in the episode notes. My guest on this episode is Dr. Aisha Lovens. Dr. Aisha Lovens is a current PhD student in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric at Christian Theological Seminary. She is a dynamic, same-gender loving minister, scholar, activist, womanist, and preacher committed to transformative theological inquiry. Her research centers on sex rhetoric in Black churches and theological institutions, with a particular emphasis on womanist theology and its liberative possibilities for marginalized communities. Her work seeks to challenge oppressive structures, amplify silenced voices, and foster a more inclusive and embodied understanding of sacred discourse. We discuss all of these topics by examining a research project she did about engendering a culture and climate of sexual safety in an institution. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Norfolk State University, a Master of Divinity, and a Doctor of Ministry degree from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Aisha Lovens. Dr. Aisha Lovens, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm a PhD student in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric at Christian Theological Seminary. My work sits at the intersection of Black preaching, womanist ethics, and socio-political and cultural critique. I'm passionate about amplifying Black voices in homiletics and exploring the liberative possibilities of sacred rhetoric. My research engages Black aesthetics, hip-hop, and Black theopoetics, always with an eye toward justice and transformation. Along with being a PhD student, I'm currently a teaching assistant for Dr. Nicole McDonald at Chicago Theological Seminary in her Queer Womanist Preaching course, and I'm a scholar activist committed to bringing critical conversations on sex rhetoric, power, and embodiment into both the academy and the church. My work primarily explores the lived experiences of Black clergy navigating sexual ethics. So I'm committed to creating spaces where scholarship goes beyond merely being an intellectual exercise, but being also a tool for collective liberation. Personally, I love movies. I love the cooking show Chopped. I don't believe I might be a chef if I wasn't called into ministry. I love theater, museums, murder mysteries. And most of all, I love reading. I'm a consummate reader of fiction and short stories. I've been reading all my life. My older brother taught me to read when I was 2 years old, and I've never looked back.
Amazing. What a phenomenal array of experiences you have. And I did notice that you were a literature lover whenever I saw some Toni Morrison appreciation being dropped in the project of yours that I read. So I'm delighted to learn more about your work. I'm so glad that you're here. I do want to hear a little bit more about your turning points in your intellectual journey. I know that you are involved in preaching. I know you're involved in teaching. I would love to know a little bit about any relevant family like backstory related to religion or like your journey through your intellectual life that kind of led you down this path of doing what you do. What are some major turning points you've had along the way?
Yeah. So basically, I would say that during my childhood, I was kind of like largely unchurched. It was like, even though I went to church, I attended church, for a portion of my childhood, church was not the center of my life, my world. What was largely centered was a lot of drama and trauma. Of course, now I have that with me. I move on in life. I go to college, get my bachelor's degree in psychology, and also a minor in early childhood education, which I didn't do anything with for a while, but I usually keep that in my back pocket in case I, need to make moves or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I had my bachelor's degree in psychology. I was working. I was actually a mental health associate at Norfolk State Medical Center in Newark, New Jersey, because I'm from New Jersey. I was working there for a long time. That was like primarily what I did. And then, I specialized in addiction. And so I was an addiction specialist, at my next job. Economic downturn came in 2009, got laid off from my job. And so now I'm like, okay, Lord, what you want me to do? Like, because now in 2003, I started like more fully tending to my relationship with Jesus. I'm like, okay, 2009 here, sister need cheddar. What you want me to do, Lord? Like,
Right.
Lord said, go to seminary. I was going to do something else, but I got hired at this company. The Lord said go to seminary, but I was like still pushing to see which way I was going to go. I got hired at this job, and it was a good job. It was a director of a group home. Got hired. The lady hired me everything, and she said, "Okay, I'm gonna send you the paperwork." I never heard from that lady again. So I knew that, God was saying go to seminary. So I went to seminary, started in New Jersey, New Brunswick Theological Seminary. Then my mom was like, you can come to Charlottesville, because she was living in Charlottesville, Virginia. She said, you can come to Charlottesville. I will like see you through your education. So came down, started going to the School of Theology of Virginia Union. That's when I got my Master of Divinity in 2013. 2016 to 2019, I got my Doctor of Ministry. And in my Master of Divinity, that's what caused me to do this work, because it was an onslaught of the sexual microaggressions, harassment, and which is what caused me to want to do this work. I was not going to do this work already, which I think I was going to tell you about that later, but I'll say about it now that I was going to, do something with preaching, but God had it so that I was going to do this work.
Well, let's dive into your work then, okay? Because whenever I got in touch, I asked you to send me a project that you've worked on, and you sent me a piece called Gathering at the Clearing, Engendering a Culture and Climate of Sexual Safety at STVU. I would love to know a little bit about the origin of this project, so feel free to just continue that story that you were telling and just kind of like take me into this project. Tell me what you were seeing, and then tell me how this project all starts to formulate in your mind.
It was a little bit of a journey. So I went to the Doctor of Ministry program in 2016, having waited till my son finished high school. I wanted to wait until he finished before I started going for another degree. So when I went to the homiletics, when I went to the program, my homiletics mentor, Dr. James Henry Harris, wanted me to focus on homiletics. But the director of the Doctor of Ministry program wanted me to focus on creative arts, specifically dance, because I was heavily involved with praise dance and mime at the time. I was clear that I wasn't going to focus on creative arts, though, because one, I felt that whatever I was doing in that arena, I was already doing. And for two, I didn't feel led to any like scholarly study of it. So for the whole first year of the program, I was thinking that I would do something around homiletics. I had the idea that I was going to focus on the character of the preacher, where I would use case studies and interviews and surveys to identify the most meaningful and practical ways to prepare STVU preachers for long-term ministry grounded in integrity. So I wanted to use these case studies and interviews to identify the lives of Black preachers who had lived lives of integrity, based on a given definition and criteria. Look at their background, look at methods of preparation, ascertain if there were any overarching themes that arose that would lead to more potential for a long-term ministry of integrity. I was hoping to formalize a methodology for integrity that would help preachers understand the importance of integrity as an integral facet of preaching, to increase accountability among preachers, provide preachers with a proactive opportunity to practice integrity. But over time, I realized that integrity alone wasn't the core of my concern. By the second year of the program, I had done enough soul searching to realize that the core of my concern was sexual integrity, not simply integrity. So then I thought I would create a 5-week class for preachers and pastors where they would be exposed to certain scriptures, sermons, and literature with a focus on sexual integrity, along with discussions about music and popular culture. I had wanted to, measure changes in attitudes and perceptions via pre and post tests. But that didn't make the cut either because I didn't have the support of the school to do any like separate classes. So while in my research methods course, the professor of the course, who's also a friend, really grounded into me that I need to take into heavy consideration simplifying my methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted it to be all these things. I wanted to save the world with my project, but I also wanted to graduate.
Right. Yeah, that's the problem that a lot of doctoral advisors have to rein people in. They're like, this project is so big. This is a career, not a single project.
Right. Right, exactly. So it just occurred to me that I could conduct candid community conversations, something I could get support for from the school administration. So that's how it started.
When you were there, the piece talks about sexual microaggressions, harassment, and violations that impact the environment and impact the conduciveness to theological learning in the school. I know that this is a sensitive topic, but I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about some examples that you wish to highlight of that harassment, microaggression, and or other violations that you've seen and noticed while you were there.
So I wanted to define things, just so everybody could be on the same page about it. So start with the harassment. I define harassment as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, offensive remarks about a person's gender or sexual orientation, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature that creates a toxic environment that's not conducive to productivity. And so an example of that would be like a female student being called sexy by a male student that she just met. And despite the fact that she redirects him, he persists in harassing her. I'm sharing like real examples of things.
Mm-hmm.
She had gone to the school about previous experiences that she had at the school already. This time she just she says she doesn't even deal with it because she won't get the help that she needs from the school. The sexual microaggressions, I got this definition from racial microaggressions, but changed it, to fit what I'm talking about. So I consider those commonplace daily indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, about one's gender or sexuality, that communicate that one is viewed as less than important, not whole, not smart, or can be treated in any way in which another chooses to treat them. And some of those examples can include harassment, but also include the gaslighting, the objectification, victim blaming, body and clothing shaming, and sexist language. That happens very often where, people are commenting on your looks or just wanting to focus on you because of how you look. And the violations, that's where you get the R word, attempted R word, gang R word, date R word, statutory R word, stalking behaviors, or any other form of violence of a sexual nature not covered by any of the other definitions. So this is the one that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about, because one example was the female student. This was reported to me in the midst of doing the work, that a female student was doing her work study in one of the offices of the school, and a male peer went into the office and attempted to violate her. The school administration indicated that it would do something, but apparently the two students wound up back in class together again with nothing having been done. And so that was, a shock to me to hear. The second example, this is one that I wish that I had highlighted at the time, but I confess that I was not sure how to deal with it myself. But a student shared with me, because, everybody was aware that I was doing this work. She shared with me that she had, been violated by a fellow student as she was matriculating through. And she went through all the appropriate steps. She filed the requisite Title IX paperwork. She, of course, reported what happened to her in detail in the paperwork. She was brought before a panel of people that included students, administrators and professors. And she once again had to share what happened to her. And at the end, one of the professors, after all of this, she went through, it came down to a professor telling her that she was just a spurn lover and no consequences were brought for the offender. She told this to me, but I was concerned about dealing with it because I didn't have all of the details of it, So, of course, you got to be mindful of how you just talk about things without any, appropriate stuff. Of course, I was able to minister to her, pray with her, but at the moment that she shared it with me, but I didn't feel comfortable necessarily dealing with it in my document, in my project. But then when a January 12th incident, this just happened, Gregory, because, R.A. Vernon had made a statement in a sermon. I don't know if you heard about this, but he said he didn't argue, you picked them. Yeah, to those who have dealt with R or anything, oh my God, my heart goes out to you. But like he said, he didn't argue, you picked them. But so he apologized a day or two later. And, we could, kind of debate about the degree of the apology's authenticity. But before he did so, there was so much backlash. And amid the backlash, Candace Bembo, who's a feminist theologian, gave this comprehensive response. And so when I read the response and attached the comments, that same woman who shared that story with me on the campus of STVU was sharing again in those comments about what happened to her and how his language was so triggering to her, sharing how she wasn't believed at STVU when she reported her assault. She's still hurting from not being believed. I feel like, this is like an ongoing thing, that has to be dealt with. So that's the violation. That's the type of violation that I'm referring to. Those are some examples.
Oh, very powerful examples too. And so while you are learning about these things, the impression that I get from your work is that it's very important to bring these things to the surface, bring them into the light, learn how to communicate about them. And so the project has a model that for initiating and engaging in difficult conversations about sex and sexuality. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about the model that you developed to address these issues. Tell me about that.
So the research methodology that I developed for my study was ethnographic research, which, simply is just a process designed to study and interpret culture. And I use what is called an emic perspective, which is very simply an insider view. And this allowed me to be able to be a participant observer within the context of the identified issue. So the method of involvement was to have a series of in-class conversations, which were facilitated with the use of open-ended questions. So Toni Morrison, here go my love of literature.
Yes.
In her novel Beloved, that when warm weather came, baby Suggs Holy took her great big heart to the clearing, a wide, open place cut deep in the woods, nobody knew for what, at the end of a path known only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. The clearing is a space that has been carved out either by human effort or by natural circumstances, whereby the ground is then ready to be cultivated for a fresh foundation to be laid for growth, building, space for communal gathering. So that's where Gathering at the Clearing, the title, came from. And Toni Morrison, foundationally, Toni Morrison has this beautiful passage in the book Beloved that has been quoted often and is the foundation for my work, the theological part of the theological and biblical foundation. And she says, it started this way: laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced. Women laughed. Children cried, until exhausted and riven, all and each lay about the clearing, damp and gasping for breath. In the silence that followed, baby Suggs holy offered up to them her great big heart. Here, she said, in this here place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and to dance, backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. Saying no more, she stood up and then danced and with her twisted hip, the rest of what her heart had to say, while the others opened their mouths and gave her the music. Long notes held until the four-part harmony was perfect enough for their deeply loved flesh. And so my feeling was that by talking about these sensitive topics, we were in this space that I just described. I engaged students through classes in which they were enrolled in the 2018 spring and summer quarters of the academic year, which allowed me to observe the students in their natural academic setting. I requested that the professors allow me to conduct the candid community conversations at the second half of the class, so that would allow any who didn't want to participate the option of leaving. But then participants were asked to discuss when they thought it was appropriate to call someone baby or sweetie, and if they thought that sex and sexuality should be discussed more often in the seminary. And then finally, they viewed a victim blaming skit done by one of their male peers and me as the researcher. And upon completion of the skit, I asked participants to share their reactions. Each candid community conversation lasted approximately 90 minutes. Following the in-class candid conversations, participants were asked to complete an anonymous post-conversation survey. And then I also conducted one-on-one interviews with the goal of speaking with students who had made an impression on me during the conversations. If the student said something that I wanted to find out like a little bit more about in general, they had shared something personal as a result of the conversation or presented with a level of insight into the topic, I tapped them for further conversation. I also wanted to get overall perceptions from these individuals about their perceptions of the conversation and to give me an idea of their perception, both of the mood in the room and of their peers in the moments and days succeeding the conversation. Kind of also wanted to see if like anybody had been talking about it too.
Very cool. And this is something that sounds like it could be applicable to almost any institution. So any listeners out there who might be like, well, this is just about this one school. This sounds like it's applicable to most institutions, whether it's a professional, a for-profit corporation, a nonprofit entity, a university or college, even a high school. It sounds like it's kind of applicable across multiple organizational structures, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes, the model itself can be like used in any arena, anywhere you could take it anywhere because it's definitely supposed to be put down on paper in a particular setting to be able to be carried into any other setting.
Wonderful. Tell me how the institution felt about this. Was it like an alliance? Was it sort of butting of heads? How did they feel about what you were doing, and how did they work with or against you, if that makes any sense?
I don't have any current alliances with the school. I graduated in 2019. I did teach there as an adjunct professor in the Doctor of Ministry program for about 2 years. But I don't have any current alliances. At the time, I had a lot of support from the administration and professors. Like I had a lot of positive feedback from the administration. Every professor I spoke with was very positive. Dr. Sylvester Smith, an ethics professor at the school, he gave me so many books and allowed me to sit in on his ethics classes when he taught on sexual ethics. When I met with the dean, he was very supportive. He offered me a lot of resources to undergird the biblical and theological foundations of my work. My advisors, Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart and Dr. Jessica Young Brown, had my back and my front. They helped me so much because I was attacked by my peers for my work at one point. Like when I did my I forget what it's called, but it was basically like, I had to present my work for the first time. And this is when I had really like kind of like banged it out, got this like, whole thing together to really like start dealing with it. My peers and my cohort, it was like throwing a brick in a dark room, you know what I'm saying? Because people was like, wait, what? Who did it? Like they started like getting a little uppity. But my advisors, I mean, like I had these like strong black women that was like, no, we not about to do that here, baby. And they like people could say what they want to say, but if you not right and you trying to attack somebody for doing their work, and this is my truth, they won't have none of that. I had a lot of support from the school. Now, the support that I would say that I didn't have is like they weren't making any structural changes, to for me to do the work. They was like, you can fit into the what we already have structured to get it done. So that's the type of support that I would say I didn't have, which I mean, I can't say I really blame them because we're on a larger institution. We're in a larger, like, okay, we're the School of Theology, but we're on the Virginia Union University campus. So, you know, there are limitations to what they can and can't do.
Okay, so the project suggests some strategies that can assist creating a better culture and a better climate of sexual safety for students,
Mhm.
and has some recommendations for how the School of Theology can become a sexually healthy and more responsible institution. Are there any specific strategies that you would love to see occur? Like what did occur, what could occur, and what are some things that the strategies that institutions should put in place in order to get their house in order, so to speak, for the safety of all?
I can tell you straight up, Gregory,
Yeah,
that none of them did occur,
right.
unfortunately. But what I would have loved to see occur were some workshops on power dynamics within sexual assault and sexual violence, along with the pre and post test to measure perceptions and attitudes. Like that one was, I think, a big deal because, like, as I was like going through, one of the things that I found, one of the attitudes, like people seem to not understand power dynamics in sexual assault and crimes and stuff. Like they don't understand power dynamics. Like, if you are a pastor and you are counseling a parishioner and then you start being involved sexually with that parishioner, that's not an affair. You know, that is there's a power differential at play. And so, a lot of times the woman will be called an adulteress and, a home wrecker, but no, because she was being counseled by this person and now they're in a different situation, a sexual situation. So I wanted to see some conversations around power dynamics at work because that's a huge thing. And then one of the things that I primarily was advocating for was using the orientation as an opportunity to capture the attention and imagination of incoming seminarians about how they expect seminarians to treat their fellow seminarians, which would include methodology that could begin to change the tide from victim blaming to confronting violators. Because one of the things that I did within the Candid Community Conversations is the role playing skit that I mentioned, that I would act out with a male volunteer. The skit was actually created in the 2010s, but when I was like trying to find it on the internet, I couldn't find it this time. But what I did find was that people have started like depicting the scenario that skit because it was like a skit that was like on a government website. But people started depicting it, and a famous one is a Tracy Ullman what were you wearing sketch.
Mm.
And Tracy Ullman is like so hilarious. But basically she just like walks in the room and there's a guy sitting there and he's coming to report that he'd been robbed. And she's just like, okay, well, were you wearing this suit at the time that you got robbed? And he's kind of like, what? You know? And she like, So was you wearing this suit? Like, and so then she's like, so have you been charitable in the past? Like, have you been committing acts of philanthropy? So the guy is kind of looking at her like she out of her mind, because he's coming to report that he's been robbed, and now he's being accused of dressing in ways that would suggest that he wants to be robbed.
Right.
I was doing that sketch in each of the candid conversations, and it was really well received because participants could see how ridiculous it was to try to blame somebody for being robbed because of their attire or for acts of philanthropy. But what was interesting was that despite the whole display, people would go back to this embedded belief that victims were to blame when it came to being assaulted.
Hmm.
When I tell you, like, my mind was truly blown by it,
Yeah.
you know. But here's a little like history point that I wanted to lift up. As T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong point out in their 2015 publication, A False Report, A True Story of Rape in America, even or especially the police who investigate sex crimes debate the believability of assault victims. Because, like, historically, doubt has been the default setting. It was this 17th century Lord Chief Justice of England, William Hale, more than any other justice who set a legal precedent. And he did so in this 2-volume criminal law treatise. It was entitled The History of the Pleas of the Crown. And so he developed this legal framework that invokes the biblical Potiphar's wife who falsely accuses Joseph of sexual assault, and he evoked the fear of the false accuser. And he does call rape a most detestable crime, but then he goes on to say this, that it must be remembered that it is an accusation easy to be made and hard to be proved and harder to be defended by the party accused, though never so innocent. And then he tells fellow justices that they should consider if the woman claiming rape is of good fame or evil fame, that they should see if the woman cried out or tried to flee, or did she make an immediate complaint after it? Does she have other people's support? And these are the same questions that we still get asked now. Like, we now know that these questions don't get to the heart of the matter. If you take the question about whether a woman tried to flee, we know that that's a response only for a percentage of the population. Some people fight, some people freeze, some people fawn. None of those should get more or less weight than another. But as the researcher, I didn't want to do any teaching in that space because the primary purpose was to identify thoughts that lended themselves to the sexual harassment, microaggressions, and violations. So I didn't seek to correct those beliefs that I found erroneous or problematic, but I did note them. But taking the time to consider how to change the tide, like if you think about it from that historical perspective and how that same historical perspective has been used from the 17th century up until now, I mean, it really is the legal precedent that still has the most weight. And this is the same the same precedent that is used to blame the victim. I really wanted to see that be dealt with in the orientation because I felt like it could be. But none of those things happened. It was all in my project thesis, but none of it happened in real time, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Well, it's an amazing project. And like I said, it's applicable across any type of institution. And I think that that's really cool because there's so much that can go forward from there. Like once you develop something that you feel strongly about, that you've done research on, it's pretty cool to have that sort of as like a launch pad into the future, which brings us to now because you're a part of this, this public scholarship cohort with Sacred Rights. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about how you're planning to like bring your work more into like the public sphere with regards to like some of the trainings that you've done and what you do now going forward in the work that you care so much about.
Well, so the first thing that I'm going to be doing is presenting um well, I should say the first thing I'm hoping to do is present at the American Academy of Religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm hoping to present, like, I feel like very ready to, now turn my face to the public. I've, spent a lot of time, just like kind of writing and processing and reading, but I'm ready to look at, sharing a lot of these results with the world. Um, so yeah, that's how I'll answer that for now. Because I'm just, saying to you specifically, Gregory, like I'm not sure how that fits into which question. So I don't want to step over my other words. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, and just in general as well, why do you think it matters for scholars like you to try to break out and to reach a wider audience? Like, why does public scholarship matter for you specifically? Why do you think it matters for scholars to be more public facing?
Okay. So scholars, I think it's important because scholars getting their work into the public sphere is important because knowledge can't be confined to academia, really. It has the power to shape public discourse, it has the power to inform policy, it has the power to transform communities. It has the capacity to disrupt a lot of the information, which is so very important in a socio-political and sociocultural moment. And it provides well-researched insights that can inform movements, activism, and policymaking. Um, I feel like it's so important because public engagement ensures that critical theological and ethical work is not just theoretical, but it's lived in practice. It lets scholars reach and impact people who may never set foot in an academic institution that's so big. Particularly through my program, my PhD program, Dr. Frank Thomas, who is the founder and visionary behind that program. He wants Black people to be able to bring this work that we're doing into the churches. Because there are a lot of people in churches who will never step foot into a seminary. Also, for scholars working on issues that directly affect marginalized communities, public engagement ensures that research is not just about communities, but also for and with communities. So, and not to mention, public scholarship can open up additional, streams of income,
Hmm.
which we all need a little bit more streams, you
Yes.
know, and create alternative career paths outside of traditional academic roles.
What about some of the risks that you see? Like, what's risky about it?
For me personally, my work on womanist sexual ethics, justice, and preaching challenges traditional theological norms. So, engaging in public scholarship for myself could potentially provoke backlash from religious communities or conservative academic spaces. And speaking on these topics in public forums could make me a target for trolls or doxing or hate speech. So, excuse me, I feel like it's important to manage my digital boundaries, and my safety is essential. So at this point for me, my risk is low because I don't have a large online footprint at the moment.
Hmm.
But I do, think about those types of, risks.
Are there any projects that we didn't discuss that you'd like to, preview for listeners to look out for or anything like that?
Well, I don't have any upcoming publications at the moment, but I'm actively working on this essay that places the apocryphal book of Susanna in conversation with the character of Janie in Zora
Mm.
Kirsten's Their Eyes Were Watching God. You
Oh,
see,
cool.
he working with that literature, like I'm all about that.
Yeah.
So it's a womanist dialogic reading that compares how both texts depict communal inaction and gendered scrutiny. And so this piece engages questions around, womanist ethics and biblical interpretation. And I hope to share more about that soon. In the meantime, I'm always in conversation, in different spaces. So folks can, I don't know where you can find me, but but you can, email me.
Yeah. The Sacred Rites website has your full cohort list, which I always link in the show notes so people can find your bio and things like that through the Sacred Rites website. Well, Dr. Aisha Lovens, what a lovely conversation. Thank you so much as well for talking to me about such a sensitive topic and, highlighting issues that are present within institutions that should be safe for all students, staff, and faculty members alike to, learn and grow as people and pursue their goals and hopes and, their certifications and degrees in safety. And so I appreciate you shining a light on an institution that, you have a personal connection to and that you cared about trying to improve. It means a lot to hear this personalized story about the project that you did in an institution that you were personally affiliated with. So I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas to talk to me about it.
Yes, and thank you for listening, and thank you for having me.